I thought you were going to say you and me could hold Justin Fields to 45 passing yards, which is probably not too far out of the realm of possibility at this point. But, it is what it is, Jacob. Heading into this week, into week 7, let's talk about some must-start players. And the first one on this list, interesting, because Pro Football Focus doesn't love him this year, but you seem to like him, at least from a fantasy perspective, and that's Aaron Rodgers down the Steelers. Why is he a must-start candidate this week?
Yeah, so I know you mentioned earlier, Joe, Aaron Rodgers' average depth of target, this year, has been pretty much last among qualified quarterbacks. He's just checking the ball down a lot. So I get the reason that people won't look at him as a great fantasy asset. But he's playing a Bengals team that's allowed the second most passing yards to quarterbacks this season. And they're going to be probably without Trey Hendrickson this week. The Bengals are going to struggle to contain the pass because of that. They already can't get pressure with Hendrickson. They have the 4th lowest pressure rate. That's going to allow Rodgers to hold the ball maybe a little bit longer and, take some of those shots downfield that we haven't really seen. I don't think he's going to fundamentally change the way he plays. He still wants to get the ball out of his hand quickly. But even if he just holds the ball for a 10th of a second more, he can get a few more of those intermediate completions to guys like DK Metcalf and Darnell Washington. So I like the idea of backing Rodgers. He's been great when he's not pressured. He has a 123.7 passer rating with 824 yards, 9 touchdowns, just 1 interception when kept clean. So this just seems like a great matchup for him. It maybe doesn't have the highest ceiling, but I think he has as high a floor as any streaming quarterback out there.
All right, Jacob, from one AFC potential playoff contender to another, and that's New England Patriots, and you have another must start. You have a must start here in the backfield. Sell me on Rhamondre Stevenson, Jacob? I mean, we've had all sorts of conversations about Travion Henderson, but Rhamondre Stevenson is a must start this week. Why is that?
Yeah, I'm still a big Travion Henderson guy. I'd be lying if I told you I wasn't disappointed with his usage so far. But Mike Vrabel seems to trust Stevenson more than Henderson, which makes sense to an extent because Stevenson's a veteran. But when you factor in the fumbling issues, it does get a little bit frustrating. Anyway, the reason I like Stevenson in this matchup, the Titans have given up a league-high 9 rushing touchdowns to running backs this season. Stevenson is by far the Patriots' leader in red zone carries with 11. I think Drake May is second on the team. So you look at that situation, you're saying Travion Henderson's really not going to take those carries away from him. Antonio Gibson's out for the season. So Stevenson's going to be involved in that red zone area. And yeah, he's only averaging 3.1 yards per carry. But if he can do that and find his way into the end zone once or twice, you're looking at a guy who's going to be in that high-end RB2 range. So it may not be a fun play to make because his lacking efficiency, but the touchdown upside, suggests you have to play him this week.
Any chance that Mike Vrabel is just getting the 2 sons and the last names confused, Jacob, which is why Rhamondre keeps playing? No, I'm just kidding. But all right, let's move on to your last must-start player of the week, Jacob, and that's Xavier Worthy with the Chiefs, who seems to have found himself a role that he's comfortable with in Kansas City's offense. Why is Xavier Worthy a must-start for you?
Yeah, I think a lot of people will be kind of looking at his 2-catch outing against the Lions and saying, do I really want to start him with, Juju and Hollywood getting more targets and now Rashee Rice is coming back? Like, what is Xavier Worthy's role going to be? I think that he's going to be in pretty good shape working across from Rashee Rice. Rice is going to take attention away from Worthy. That's going to open up more space for him. And we know he has great deep speed. But one of the things Worthy did last year was he caught a lot of short passes near the line of scrimmage and then tried to turn them into, yards after the catch. And he was pretty solid at doing that. But one of the things he did was rack up receptions because of that while opening up space for Rice. So I think these two guys just really complement each other well. And the Raiders have allowed the 3rd most receptions to receivers this season. So there's going to be plenty of targets to go around for Rice and Worthy and Hollywood Brown and Juju Smith-Schuster, even Travis Kelce. So with Patrick Mahomes playing well, you got to have Worthy in the lineup each week. I know he's a little bit banged up, but his speed and his ability to just rack up catches near the line of scrimmage is going to keep him having that sort of high floor as a wide receiver 3 at the very worst each week.
And Jacob, you mentioned Rice coming back this week, and I'm curious, how does his return impact the rest of Kansas City's offense? What should fantasy managers be on the lookout for this week?
Yeah, so I would say that Rice is probably going to be the team's target leader. He likes to work over the middle of the field a little bit more than some of their other receivers. That should open up a little more space for Travis Kelce to operate in. I know Kelce doesn't have that same explosiveness he once had, but he should have more space to operate in, which would allow him to rack up receptions. And then, like I said about Worthy, he's going to be able to operate more near the line of scrimmage and on those deep downfield passes instead of being, the top receiver target for him. So I anticipate those three guys will benefit. Hollywood Brown and Juju Smith-Schuster will probably see less targets and kind of split a little more of their playing time. And I think Tyquan Thornton with Rashee Rice back, I don't think he's phased out entirely, but he's certainly not going to get the type of opportunities that he got in the past. So, if you have him on your fantasy team, you can leave him on your bench, but he might be a guy you want to swap out for a streamer after this week. Let's see what the rotation looks like, but I anticipate he's going to be more of a depth option at this point.
All right, Jacob, let's move on to your must-sit players for Week 7. A guy who handed the Eagles a little bit of an upset on Thursday Night Football is quarterback Jackson Dart. Giants fans very excited about this guy, but you clearly are not, at least from a fantasy perspective. So why is Jackson Dart a must-sit this week?
Look, most weeks I will entertain the idea of starting Dart because of his rushing upside. I think he had something like 54 rushing yards in each of his first 3 starts, which I think those are like Josh Allen rookie year type numbers. So, Dart's got some upside there. The problem is he's playing the Broncos this week, and the Broncos defense is one of the best in the NFL, specifically at limiting scrambling quarterbacks. They've allowed just 46 rushing yards to quarterbacks this year, and that's after playing Jalen Hurts and Justin Fields. They held Jalen Hurts to 3 rushing yards, which is really unheard of. I know he hasn't been maybe as explosive this season, but Jalen Hurts usually has at least a couple runs each game and turns it into like 20-ish yards at a minimum. So for the Broncos to contain him, keep him in the pocket, make him beat him as a passer was impressive. I expect they'll have Dart do the same thing. They just limited Justin Fields to 45 passing yards, and I think you and I will both agree that Jackson Dart probably is a better passer than Justin Fields, even at this young stage in his career, but there just isn't a lot of upside in this matchup for Dart, so I'd rather keep him on the bench this week.
I thought you were going to say you and me could hold Justin Fields to 45 passing yards, which is probably not too far out of the realm of possibility at this point. But, it is what it is, Jacob. All right, let's move down to Jacksonville. And a guy who got off to a really hot start this season is Travis Etienne, but now he's on your must-sit list for this week. Why is that?
Yeah, he's been bottled up in back-to-back weeks, and I can see the case for starting him for volume purposes, but I think that against a Rams defense that hasn't yet allowed a touchdown to a running back, some people will say, well, oh, that's bound to change at some point, right? But we just watched them stuff Derrick Henry at the 1-yard line on a 4th and goal opportunity, so I'm not so sure that Travis Etienne's going to have more success if given red zone opportunities to score. So even if he racks up, a good amount of yardage, say he gets 60 or 70 yards, he's still not going to be that high-end running back this week. He could be a good flex play, but I just kind of think he has a low ceiling. So if you have better options than him, I would keep him on the bench in this matchup and just say, hey, he's probably not going to get a touchdown, and this matchup just isn't the best for him.
All right, Jacob, a player that's gotten a lot of attention this year, both from you and I and in headlines and stories, and is A.J. Brown, and he makes your must-sit list this week. Why is A.J. Brown on the must-sit list?
Yeah, I go back and forth on Brown seemingly every week. It feels like he's involved in this segment in one way or another. But this matchup against the Vikings is really tough for him. The Vikings are excellent against wide receivers this year, but more importantly, they play zone coverage on 76.5% of their snaps, according to Sharp Football Analysis. That's 12th most in the NFL. Jalen Hurts has struggled against zone coverage this year. He ranks 34th among 41 quarterbacks in EPA per play against zone coverage this season. So I just don't have much faith in Hurts having a good game against the Vikings. He's going to have a little bit trouble distributing the ball to his receivers. So I think Brown, again, is a guy with another low ceiling type of output in this game. So can you justify starting him? Sure. But if you have other options that you can plug in at flex, this may be the week to do it. And we may be moving on from, A.J. Brown's going to have this breakout to A.J. Brown's going to be a matchup-based streamer, which sounds crazy to think about.
All right, Jacob. It's time to skin that smoke wagon and get to work. Made famous by Wyatt Earp and Kurt Russell and Tombstone. But it's the return of Big Take Jake. What's your biggest, boldest prediction for Week 7?
All right, partner. Here's what I'm going with as my big take this week. I'm going to take Tez Johnson to go for over 125 receiving yards for for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers against the Detroit Lions. I mentioned it earlier. The Lions are super banged up in that secondary, partner. They're missing 5 of their top 6 cornerbacks. Brian Branch may not be playing because of a suspension. And then, you look at safety Kirby Joseph, he's dealing with a knee problem. So how are they going to defend these guys in the Buccaneers receiving core? I know most weeks that would mean Emeka Egbuka and Mike Evans are going to have big weeks, but those guys might not play. Tez Johnson could end up being the number 1 receiver for the Buccaneers. Let's expect him to have a big game. Let's back this, smaller sized, pint-sized rookie here. Have a big day. Go 125 yards. We'll put him in the end zone, too, for a touchdown. So fire him up. He's going to be a top 15 fantasy receiver.